Hey folks, this is Pat Quinn with the JoBlo Movie Network, welcoming film fans worldwide for another round of Show Me the Sequel. As always, we're focusing on a genre film that never got the follow-up it perhaps deserved. I'll start with a quick recap, share some behind-the-scenes stories, and then pitch my concept for a sequel. When Shaun of the Dead opened in September of 2004, there was little enthusiasm for another zombie film. Between Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later and Zack Snyder's remake of Dawn of the Dead, audiences were pretty much done with the undead shuffling stiffs. What no one expected was a horror comedy with an equal amount of beer, blood, and thick British accents. The film stars Simon Pegg as Shaun and Nick Frost as his best mate, Ed. Shaun lives in a flat in North London and leads what one could call the quintessential slacker life. He has a job he hates, an overachieving roommate who thinks he's a loser, and a stepfather who pretty much feels the same way. Shaun spends most of his free time playing video games with Ed or getting drunk at the local pub, the Winchester. As if things weren't tough enough, 10 minutes into the film, he gets dumped by his girlfriend Liz, played by Kate Ashfield. A sympathetic Ed takes Shaun down to the Winchester where he can drown his sorrows in pints of lager. The next morning, Shaun stumbles down to the local market for a snack. Hungover and half awake, he's oblivious to the crashed cars and dead bodies strewn around the neighborhood. When he gets home, he sits on the couch next to Ed to watch some TV. Oddly, every channel has an emergency news broadcast. Even more odd, Ed notices a young woman in the backyard. When they go outside to talk to her, she attacks, and they're forced to kill her with a cricket bat. Not as effective as a Louisville slugger, but it does the job. Another zombie stumbles into the yard, and Shaun realizes it must be the undead apocalypse. They take his now zombified roommate's car and drive over to get Shaun's parents, Barbara and Philip, who are played by Penelope Wilton and the always amazing Bill Nighy. The plan is to get Liz and then head over to the Winchester where they can safely wait things out. Philip was bitten earlier but seems alright for the moment. When they get to Liz's place, there are zombies everywhere. Shaun fights his way through and convinces Liz and her friends David and Diane to join them. They reach the waiting car and Ed hits the gas. Plowing through zombies like it's a video game, Ed is having a great time. Shaun and Philip have a brief father-son moment before Philip drops dead. They pull over to get rid of his body, but he comes back to life and they have to make a run for it. They eventually reach the Winchester, but there's a horde of zombies between them and the front door. With a few pointers from acting coach Diane, they pretend to be zombies and make it to the front door. But Ed's phone rings and he starts chatting with a friend. The zombies attack, forcing Shaun to create a distraction so the others can get inside. Eventually, he manages to join them and they board up the doors and windows. One zombie does get in, and during the fight, Shaun discovers that the pub's decorative Winchester rifle actually works. At this point, his mom admits that she was bitten earlier, and moments later, she dies. David insists they use the rifle before she can reanimate. He and Shaun argue, and Shaun reluctantly has to shoot her when Mom starts to come back to life. At that point, the zombies break down the doors and all hell breaks loose. Ed is attacked from all sides and things look bad. He volunteers to be the diversion this time so Shaun and Liz can make a run for it. But then the British Army arrives, saves the day, and all is well. A few months later, things are mostly back to normal. The remaining zombies have become the new cheap labor force. Liz and Shaun have moved in together, and in his free time, Shaun plays video games with the zombified Ed, who's kept safely locked up in the garden shed. And there you go, that's the plot. But with a film like this, the plot isn't the main attraction. Shaun of the Dead is a classic because, first of all, it's funny. It's clever. The characters are broad, but still people you care about. There are some good action scenes, a lot of zombie gore, a great soundtrack, and of course, Bill Nighy. Before we talk about how Shaun of the Dead came about, let's talk zombies in general for a minute. In 2010, The Walking Dead premiered on AMC, and suddenly the undead were the hottest thing since Popeye's chicken sandwich. But for decades, zombies only meant one thing: George Romero. When the original Night of the Living Dead hit the screens in 1968, it was a game changer. For one thing, they still didn't have an MPAA code back then. Little kids were buying their own tickets for a Saturday matinee and watching zombies chew on raw meat. The film made over 250 times its budget at the box office, and in 1999 it was picked by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry. prior to that, the only decent zombie flick was 1943's I Walked with a Zombie, directed by Jacques Tourneur. A stupid title, but an awesome film and highly recommended if you haven't seen it. Romero followed Night of the Living Dead up with 1978's Dawn of the Dead, which was a hit with both audiences and critics, and in a bizarre twist, made a star out of makeup artist Tom Savini. There was a brief flurry of titles after that, mostly from Italy for some reason. Zombie 2, also known as Zombie Flesh Eaters, City of the Living Dead, Zombie Holocaust, and Hong Kong's very own Kung Fu Zombie. In 1985, Dan O'Bannon wrote and directed the cult classic Return of the Living Dead, but it wasn't a hit at the box office, and overall zombies were pretty much dead and buried. That is, until the film that changed all the rules. No, I don't mean Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, I'm talking about 28 Days Later. After decades of slow, shuffling stiffs, Danny Boyle gave us zombies that run. These weren't your daddy zombies, these suckers were on the hunt and hauling ass. That was followed up 2 years later by Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, which leads us up to Shaun of the Dead. In 1999, Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright created a TV show for Britain's Channel 4 called Spaced. The sitcom ran 2 seasons and also starred Nick Frost. One episode featured a subplot with Simon Pegg's character playing the video game Resident Evil while under the influence of amphetamines. He begins to hallucinate that he's fighting off a zombie invasion, and as you can imagine, hijinks ensue. Pegg and Wright had so much fun making the episode they decided to develop it into a feature film. Back then, they were calling the project Tea Time of the Dead. It took 18 months, but they finally signed a deal with Working Title Films. The shoot lasted 9 weeks, with all of the scenes at the Winchester being shot at the Duke of Albany, a real pub in the south of London. Sadly, the Duke of Albany no longer exists since it was demolished in 2008. Most of the cast had also been involved in Spaced and other Channel 4 projects, though the part of Simon Pegg's mom was originally offered to Helen Mirren. She turned it down because she wanted to play a funnier character. During filming, it was decided not to follow the path set by 28 Days Later, where the zombies had been fast and aggressive. When asked in an interview why they chose to have slow-moving zombies, Simon Pegg replied, "Because death is not an energy drink." There are numerous hidden references to the original Night of the Living Dead throughout the film. For example, Shaun is on the phone with his mother when Ed yells, "We're coming to get you, Barbara," which of course is the famous line that Johnny mocks his sister with in Night of the Living Dead's opening graveyard scene. When George Romero saw Shaun of the Dead, he didn't get the joke until Edgar Wright reminded him of the line. Romero loved the film so much, he invited Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright to play zombies in his film, Land of the Dead. When the film was released, it was successful, though not a major hit. Ironically, it was released in the States by Universal Pictures, which just 2 weeks earlier had released Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. But it did well enough for Working Title and Universal to finance and distribute Pegg and Wright's next 2 films, Hot Fuzz and The World's End. These films have become known as the Three Flavors Cornetto Trilogy. Cornetto is an English brand of ice cream, which is eaten by Simon Pegg and Nick Frost in each of the films. Beyond the Cornetto trilogy, Edgar Wright has gone on to direct and write such films as Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and Baby Driver. Simon Pegg is one of the main characters in the ongoing Mission Impossible franchise and plays Scotty in the recent Star Trek reboots. He also wrote the script for 2016's Star Trek Beyond. He also recently reunited with Nick Frost to create the Amazon Prime television show Truth Seekers. But it was another reunion that really caught the attention of fans. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost film a coronavirus PSA playing their old characters Shaun and Ed. Phoning each other from home, they advise everyone to relax, stay in, have a cup of tea, and definitely don't pop down to the pub. Though Shaun of the Dead was only moderately successful on its initial release, it has gone on to become a cult classic. And like with all cult classics, one has to wonder if Pegg and Wright ever considered making a sequel. It turns out that they did, for about 24 hours. While writing the script for World's End, the 2 men were drinking in a pub. I know, hard to believe. And Wright came up with a concept that he called From Dusk to Shaun. The idea was that Shaun and Nick end up in Edinburgh, this time fighting vampires instead of zombies. But the concept never left the pub. Though it doesn't qualify as a sequel, the recent animated film Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did have a fun Easter egg. At one point, Spidey swings past a building with a massive billboard of Shaun and a zombie Ed posing under the title, From Dusk Till Shaun. The filmmakers have said that they decided not to do a sequel because they felt the first film was perfect, and I agree. Shaun and Ed killing more zombies would be pointless. But I do think the idea of them playing the same roles but dealing with a different type of horror would be fun. Sort of like the Abbott and Costello movies, but with more beer and funnier. I also like the idea of them fighting vampires, so I'm going to borrow that idea from Edgar Wright. I know this is kind of a goofy concept, but it has the Cornetto trilogy elements, and that being said, here's my pitch for a sequel to Shaun of the Dead. Shaun and Liz got married, and now, 17 years later, he manages the electronics store and she works at a bank. Ed has been trained to be their zombie gardener. Liz gets word from a lawyer that her uncle has passed away, and being that she's the only living relative, she's inherited his estate. Liz and Shaun take a trip up north to see the place. Her uncle lived in a tiny remote village called Gravesend, and the estate turns out to be an old hotel and pub. They've both been in a rut lately and make the spontaneous decision to take over the hotel rather than sell it. They pack everything up, including Ed, and move up north. Being that they're one of the few pubs in the village, they figure it's a sure thing. But to their surprise, the people who do come by all leave long before last call. In fact, the entire village shuts tight once it gets dark. Their neighbors warn them that it's not safe at night and to hang garlic on their doors. Shaun and Liz dismiss it as local superstition. The next day, Shaun takes Ed on a road trip to pick up some supplies from the next town. On the way back, the car breaks down and they have to walk back to the hotel. Night falls and they start to hear odd sounds. Bats keep flying over them and Ed is getting agitated. Then the bats start to morph into humans, but they're not humans, they're vampires. One of them bites Ed, but spits in disgust, realizing he's a zombie. Ed punches him and he and Shaun manage to escape back to the hotel. Liz doesn't believe their story, even as Shaun runs around looking for any handy crucifixes and some wood to carve into stakes. But she has her own encounter a few nights later. So, resigning themselves to only being open during the day, they learn to stay in after dark. One night, Shaun and Liz get into an argument about what to do next, and Shaun storms out to go for a walk. At the edge of the village, he hears music. A dark winding lane leads him into the woods. There, in a moonlit clearing, is another pub, and the place is packed. Shaun spies through a window, and he can see the crowd, and it's wild, and they're all vampires. He gets back to the hotel and has an idea. They've taught Ed how to be a bartender, which has made him really happy. And Shaun's noticed that there are a lot of zombies in the village, and they often hang out in front of the hotel. He suggests to Liz that if the vampires can have a pub, why can't the zombies? 2 nights later, the Crown and Corpse pub officially opens for business, and it's packed. Word gets out, and even a few of the villagers brave the night to see what all the fuss is about. The owner of the vampire pub doesn't like the competition and sends some of the boys over to start some trouble, but Ed and the other zombies send them packing. One thing leads to another, and it's decided the only way to settle this is with a nighttime soccer match. The vampires versus the zombies. It's a bloody match, but at the final moment, Ed scores the winning goal. The film ends with Shaun having the brilliant idea to take the Crown and Corpse and make it a franchise and open zombie pubs all across London. After all, what could go wrong? There you go. That's my pitch for a sequel to Shaun of the Dead. I hope you liked it, and thanks for watching the show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who dig this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We are an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support. This is Pat Quinn saying thanks, and see you next time.